So, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Jim Browning, and apologies, this isn't my real face. You're looking at a little avatar, a little face rig output of what my face kind of looks like. So, hopefully, I don't come across as too frightening. And the reason for that is really just to protect my privacy a little bit and maybe to make this slightly more interesting. So, I've got a set of slides here that I would like to talk through. And I say what I want to cover today is just a little bit about cyber security and some of the things that I've been doing. So I'll switch over to the slides and hopefully these are visible to you. So as I say, my name is Jim Browning, and what I'll be doing is just talking through a little bit about what tech support scams are and really what I do about them, and possibly what may interest you about those scams as well. So I'll take you through what scam baiting is about, what technical support scams are around, and who runs them. I'll say a little bit about IT and computing and cyber security, and I'll also talk about how to avoid scams. And I think if you take anything out of this at all, it's maybe to be able to spot a scam and maybe try and do something about it. So if we achieve anything at all today, it might be how to avoid you falling into a scam or recognizing when a scam happens. So without further ado, we'll just go on with these slides. So who am I? First of all, my name, it kind of isn't Jim Browning because it's an alias name. That's not my real name, but it's what I use on a YouTube channel. And I believe your teacher has sent out a little link before this invite, and you may already have had a look at my YouTube channel. If you haven't, do have a look at this. If you just search for Jim Browning on YouTube, you'll find me. I have around about 1 million subscribers to this channel, and you may be interested in having a look at some of the videos. Some of what I'll cover in this little talk you will see in a lot more detail if you have a look on YouTube. So there's about 1 million people who subscribe to me, so it's no longer a small channel. So I have a day job in IT, and this is very much a hobby for me, and you'll see in a second how and why I do this. So what is scam baiting? So I would call myself a scam baiter, and if you don't know what that term means, then it's really me trying to enter into a dialogue or lead scammers on something which is never usually recommended. Normally, if someone calls you up and you figure out that it's a scam, the best advice is usually just to hang up the phone. But in my case, I lead these scammers on because I want them to do stuff for me. I want to waste their time. And the reason why I do that is when they're talking to me, they're not scamming your parents or your grandparents. And if you're confident about doing this, then you actually may be saving someone from getting scammed as well. And it can be a bit of fun. As I say, a bit of fun as long as you know what you're doing and take a few precautions. So I, for example, never give my real details. Whenever I call someone, my caller ID is either a fake phone number or it's a phone number which I can just dispose of very easily. And there's a few services, we might talk about that. And obviously never give any personal information. There's a little bit of technical stuff as well, because I actually let scammers onto my home computer. And again, that's never really recommended. But if you know what you're doing in IT, it can be a very effective tool for finding out who those scammers are. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So that's what scam baiting is about. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what tech support scams are. I realize that not everybody on this call might know, but it's really all about someone trying to steal money from a victim. So if you get a phone call or you get a pop-up on your computer, or you get something fairly unusual on your computer which might look like an offer which looks amazingly good, you've maybe won a prize or something similar, then it's almost invariably a scam. And we'll talk about how to spot those scams. And there's usually about 3 or so types of these. One will be a cold call, and that will be something like, we are Microsoft, or we are your broadband provider, and your computer is reporting an error. That will be one. Or we were going to give you a refund for something that you paid for. And again, you mightn't recognize that you paid for something, but yet you're getting this refund. You're seemingly getting free money. And the second type is a pop-up, and I'll show some of these in just a second. And the pop-up will freeze your computer. And the third type is if you just do a web search and you come across someone pretending to be someone they're not. And I'll show examples of all of these. So the first one is a pop-up. So some of you may or may not have seen these before. These look like a virus message. These look like something is going wrong with your computer. And almost invariably you'll hear a loud sound going with these. So this will be something like, this is Microsoft, you've got a virus on your computer, please phone this number immediately. So, and it's actually at the top, it'll have usually something like Microsoft. In the middle, it'll look like your Windows Defender, it'll look like your antivirus, but in fact, these are all fake. There's a few more examples. There's one just in red. There's another one which has got a black screen. They all have one thing in common, which is there'll be a phone number somewhere on that screen. And that phone number is usually a telltale sign that the thing is fake. And normally the advice is don't call those numbers, because whoever's at the end of the phone will take you through a pretty set script and will try and steal money from you off you at the very end. But as I say, I call those phone numbers because I like to take on those scammers, and we'll talk more about that in a second. So that's what those look like. There's another variant there as well. The other one, which is maybe less well known, is if you're just surfing the internet and you've maybe got some problem with a bit of technology. In this case, I've searched at the very top of the screen here for something called Norton Antivirus Tech Support Number. So I actually typed this in this morning to see what I would find. And the bits in the middle in green are legitimate websites. So this is owned by Norton.com. But you'll notice there's no phone number in there. Most companies don't want people to call them. And there are other adverts on these top search results from Google here which have got phone numbers on them. But if you look carefully at the website address, it isn't Norton.com, it's something else. Here there's technical support number, here there's support.co.uk. Those are not genuine phone numbers, even though they appear at the top of the Google search results. If you called that number, chances are there would be a scammer on the end of it, and his job is to try and get money out of you. So this is the other type of scam. So if you're searching at all, do research which websites you're looking at and make sure it's the real thing. And how do you make sure it's a real thing? Usually it's got the company name.com in there and not something other than that. But of course, if you only glance at these results, you may well be speaking to the wrong person. And there's another type of, well, if you happen to call one of those numbers, you will almost certainly be taken through a very set script. The person on the end of the phone will tell you, you need to give me remote access to your computer. And he will give you instructions, or she will give you instructions, how to run certain things, download a bit of remote access software, and they will either give you a number to type in, or you will have to read aloud that number. So here's one, for example, that a scammer will say, look, I need you to type in a certain number here, hit download, and then he'll have access to your computer. There's another one where he'll say, give me your ID and your password, and that will be sufficient for him to connect to your computer. Or again, here's one where you have to type a support key. But as soon as you do that, you're effectively giving access to your computer to a scammer. I say they normally run very set scripts, but when they do have that access, let me just give you a little example of what they will do. So I have got another little, so let me just break out of this a little bit. Yeah, let's have a look at this one. Okay, this is just an example of bring this in here and we'll enlarge it a little bit. So this is a file that I picked up off a scammer's computer, and unfortunately this is just yesterday. This is someone who is a pensioner. Her name is Kathleen something. I've blanked out her details. And what she has done is paid 20,000 Australian dollars to somebody, in this case in Calcutta in India. And unfortunately, this poor woman has been robbed of about quite a significant amount of money. And you can see the reason here is for a holiday. But of course, she's been told to say that. So what will happen is the people who are the scammers will coach their victims to what to say to a bank, and ultimately they will get people to transfer money. That's really what it's all about. So I'll just minimize this again. So that's the one type. I'm sure probably everybody has seen and heard of robocalls. So these are automated calls to your phone, and they will pretend to be a number of people. They'll pretend to be your internet service provider. They might pretend to be your bank. These days, a very common one is Amazon Prime. We're Amazon Prime and we're going to give you a refund, or government or TV licensing is quite common in the UK. I don't know whether the audio will come through for this one or not, but I've got a little bit of audio for one message that I received at one point. So
this is an emergency call from
Visa Secure.
There is an online transaction of £600 from your account. If you did not make the payment, please press 1 immediately to talk to our representative.
If you can hear me, Jim, I can't hear it.
Okay, right. I wasn't sure whether that would come through or not. Anyway, that audio was really someone pretending to be my bank. I wasn't sure what that audio would be. I'll make the files available maybe afterwards. But that was someone pretending to be my bank. They said that £500 has been withdrawn from my account, and if this wasn't me, I need to talk to someone. So that's an example of the type of call you might get, but of course it's not from your bank at all, it's just from a scammer. So what is, whenever these people get this remote access, what is it that they do? So since we can't hear the audio, let's just have a look at a little video, which is something that I was able to pick up. And this, what you're looking at here is actually some scammer who has got remote access to, in this case, a pensioner's PC. And he's actually turned on her webcam. And although I've blurred out her face, what you're looking at here is the scammer looking at a victim's webcam. And you can see that she's on the phone to this scammer. And what she really wants to do is persuade her to log into her online bank account. And in fact, although it's going to be hard to kind of see here, they run through a very set script. They will run something called the tree command, and all that does is list directories. But the scammer will type something out here, and you can see what he's typing out. He's typing in BT mail hacked. So this person is being deliberately deceptive, and at the end of this little scrolling screen, this person will see the words that the scammer has typed. So what he's trying to do is just trying to fool the person on the end of the phone into thinking that they've got some sort of hacker problem. Now you're probably wondering why I can see all of this, because this is literally what the scammer can see, and I'll come on to that in just a moment. But this is what they do. They run a very set script, and they will try to run, there you go, there's BT mail hacked at the very bottom here. And if you're not very tech savvy, you might think that that's some sort of legitimate message. But of course it isn't. It's all just a scam. So let me just pause this little bit of video.
We have a question slightly relevant to what you're talking about.
Sure.
How do these people get hold of your mobile number, is the question.
Yeah, it's actually quite hard to figure that one out. What I can say is that they will use any means at their disposal to try to get a lot of phone numbers. So simply put, they might just look at the phone book. Okay, and obviously mobile phone numbers wouldn't appear there. But what they may do is buy or steal information from legitimate companies to try and get a list of phone numbers, because phone numbers are a commodity in India. It's mostly India where these things arise. And what you do find is there's high-tech companies or a lot of companies which have call centers out there, and they have access to real people's data. And what I have seen is that that data will be bought and sold quite openly, even though it's actually illegal to do so. So the short answer is it can come from a whole lot of different sources, but if you work your way onto just one list, that list will be passed around multiple call centers. So unfortunately, if you get one phone call, the chances are you're going to get lots of phone calls. Yeah, but it's never from a set source. But yeah, do ask as I go along here if you've got anything which might be relevant like that. So I've covered what is a technical support scam. So here you can see another example of someone, and that someone is on the top right here. I've turned on this scammer's webcam, and again I'll talk about how I can do that in just a second. But that person in the top right is scamming someone by using a few very standard tricks. They will get the victim to run certain things, like this is something called Event Viewer, which always shows errors and warnings. And that scammer will say, well, the reason why you've got these errors and warnings is you've got a hacker. And they'll run up this little thing called system config, and they will get the person to click on services. And notice that some of them are stopped here, the ones highlighted. And that's quite normal, but nevertheless, the scammer will say, you've got a problem here, these things shouldn't be stopped. And of course, it's all normal, it's just a trick that they're pulling. So this particular scammer, I have managed to report to the police. Now, whether they've actually done something or not about him, I don't know, but at least I was able to pass on that information. So again, we'll talk about how I'm able to get some of this footage in just a moment. So this one is a little, if you've seen my, and maybe if you have a chance at all, maybe just have a look on my YouTube channel. But at one point I was able to see CCTV of an operation with lots of scammers. So what you're looking at here is a still from that CCTV. So everybody in this room is running some sort of tech support scam. And in fact, this operation were disguised as a travel agency, a travel company. And they had a little secret office out the back of their normal offices. And what was happening there was, although from the outside it looks like a legitimate business, what's really happening here is that in this back office, they're taking scam calls from people who have seen those pop-ups. So it's hard to make it out here, but everyone who's sitting in this room is trying to scam someone. Now, they don't do this full time. You notice that one or two of them will be sitting looking at different websites and so on until they get a phone call. And when they get that phone call, they'll run through all those little tricks that I talked about in the last slide. So they're quite a professional organization. There's maybe up to about 20 or 30 people working here, depending on the time of the day. And what they will do is they will target various countries at certain times. So obviously early morning, this one again is in India. Early morning, they will target people who might be at home during the Australian daytime. So they'll start in Australia and they'll target their pop-ups at people in Australia. Then as the day moves on and it's UK daytime hours, they will start scamming people in the UK. And then they'll have another little evening shift where they might work for 9, 10, 11 hours. And then they'll be replaced with people operating the night shift, and they will target people in the USA. So this is just another example of one of these scam call centers, and there are probably hundreds of these operating in various locations, most of which are in India. I'll very quickly actually show you where these things are. So this is Google Earth, and what I've done is just plotted where these scam call centers are located. So this is my own view of these things. Normally I can find out pretty much exactly where they are. And what you'll find is they're scattered. There's one or two in Africa, and in this case, Ukraine. But the vast majority of them are located somewhere in India. Let me just make this. The vast majority in and around Delhi in India. So I've actually marked on here in around Delhi just the call centres that I've come across in the last, this is probably about 2 years worth. But bear in mind, this is one person looking at this as a kind of a very spare time thing. And I have personally found at least 60 of these in the last 2 years. So chances are there's maybe 10 times that number. This is Kolkata, which is another hotspot for these scam call centres. So everything marked on this map, at some point someone here has tried to steal money from me, and where I know the business name, I've just plotted it on here. So that's just to give you an idea where these scam call centres are located. Say there's a few in
I have a question.
Sure, please.
Relative to this?
Sure.
The question reads, how are there still so many of these scammers? Surely the police or FBI can trace this sort of activity.
Yeah, it's a good question. Microsoft are one of the big operators in this, and what they try to do is pretty much do what I do, as in locate these, but it's actually quite a difficult thing to do. And the reason why it's difficult is the phone number. If you call a phone number, it'll usually be a USA or a UK one, but of course it'll divert to India here. And you won't be able to tell from the phone number alone either where you're sending the call to, or if it's one of these robocalls, where it's coming from. So what they have to do, and what I have done, is to use other technology to try and find out who they are. So whenever I invite a scammer, or if I accept some sort of invitation from a scammer, if I download the remote access software, I will be monitoring what traffic goes in and out of my computer. And you can tell from the IP address roughly where these call centres are. You'll not know exactly, but it's usually good enough to identify the city that's involved. Now, to get the exact address, which I've done for a lot of these, it takes a lot more work. And that's where the real difficulty is. Microsoft and others and the FBI might be able to tell roughly where these are, but they'll not be able to tell exactly. As I say, that takes a lot more effort, and I'll maybe mention a little bit about how I do that. Hopefully that answers the question though. Okay, so that's where they are. Let's go back here. The question is also, why do they operate in the way that they do? And the short answer is there is real big business involved here. There's a lot of money involved. And this is taken from a spreadsheet that I managed to download from one scam group last year. And this is a month's worth of their revenue. And you can see that their target here is $1.8 million. And this is a fairly large scam call center. It employs about 300 people. And you can see at the end of January last year, they were pretty much on target. They were about 97, 98% of that 1.8 million. They were getting about 1.7 million. So it is a huge, huge business. And there are people at the top of those organizations who are literally millionaires as a result of this. So if you ever wonder why you get so many of these pop-ups and so many of these scam calls, this is the reason. It is a huge amount of money, especially if you're in India, where the wages may be that much less than maybe other nations. So yes, it's a huge, huge business. Whenever they gain access to your computer, as I say, they will try to get into your bank account. Now, some of them, if they're like technical support people, will just want a one-off payment. So a lot of people who fall for the old tech support scams and think they've got a virus, they will inevitably pay a bit of money, and that might be the end of it. But the worst one is if they try and encourage their victim to log into their online bank account. Because if you do that, they have the ability, hopefully you can see it here at the bottom, to disable remote input, which means they will lock your keyboard and mouse. You can't do anything. And they'll show you a black screen. So you've just logged into your bank account, and now they're free to do exactly what they want with your online bank account. And they will try and do a number of things. They'll try and either send money directly out of that bank account, or they'll use your identity documents when your screen has been blackened to open accounts elsewhere. So it could be Bitcoin sites, it could be things like transfer money using money type sites. But either way, one of the big ones is that right in front of you, they will edit things on your bank account to make it look as if they've put money in. So if, for example, they said they would refund you, they would look at your bank account, they would right-click, they would either distract you, or if they blackened your screen, they can do this without you seeing, and they'll actually pretend to add money to that account. And when they do that, their line is usually, well, we've just given you all these thousands of dollars. We only meant to give you $100 or so, so we want that money back. And they will persuade you to either send them money with you thinking that you've got extra money when you don't, or they'll get you to buy gift cards. And gift cards are really the currency of scammers. If you buy a gift card, then all they need is the number on that gift card, and they've cleanly laundered that money. So one of the big telltale signs that someone's being scammed is that someone's going and ask them to buy gift cards. No legitimate company will ever do this, but yet this happens day in, day out. They will persuade their victims to go and buy gift cards. And that's the quickest, cleanest, and most effective way that they can get money, and no one can reverse that transaction. So you will see this and recognize this, hopefully, as a sign of a scam. So if you did do that, then, and this is really kind of coming to the end, a little bit of this presentation, maybe we'll go into a few questions, but if you do spot some of those signs, then it's almost certainly going to be a scam. So gift cards are an obvious one. If the scammer talks about something like, we want you to use Western Union to transfer money, or something called TransferWise, again, those sorts of organizations, although they're legitimate websites, they're really often used by scammers, so that you should get warning signs if someone asks you to transfer money through Western Union or TransferWise. And usually that's the end of the story. There's not very many of them will attempt to kind of break your computer or put malware on it or something like that. They're really just after money, but there are a few of them who will go a little bit further, and if they don't get what they want, for example, because they've got remote access to your computer, they will actually delete files, and you may not have a backup of those, and they may do malicious things like that. So again, although it's rare, that can happen as well. So just kind of going to close up on the scam bit here, but if you did fall victim to one of these, or if one of your friends or relatives or whatever did happen to end up being scammed, what should you do? And the first thing you should do is remove that remote access software. So they'll usually install something like GoToAssist or TeamViewer. First thing you do is remove that. If you just uninstall that software, then the scammers can't get back into it again. And then really you have to go to your credit card company or your bank, and there might be a chance, if they've just transferred funds out of it, that they might be able to reverse that. It's rare, but it's possible. And then, although it's not usually needed, I would be very cautious that if someone has gained access to a friend's PC, I would definitely make sure that everything's backed up, and even go to the extreme of reinstalling everything, because you're never 100% sure what exactly they've put on your computer. And obviously do things like keep an eye on your bank statements and so on.
Question here.
Sure,
Will
yeah.
the victim turning off their Wi-Fi whilst the scammer is on help?
Yes, as long as it is a Wi-Fi connection and not wired, of course. But yes, I mean, that's the easiest thing, that if someone is being scammed and you walk on it or something, the easiest way is just to switch off that computer. You can switch off the Wi-Fi if you want that, if it's more direct, but hold your finger on the power button and just switch off your computer. And that at least will throw them out. Whilst they can only have that remote access while your Wi-Fi or your wired connection is actually on. Yep.
And a follow-up for that as well. Do you think the vulnerable groups, such as the elderly, have to be educated more? And would you say that this should be undertaken by government? And also, do you also think, in general, the overall awareness regarding cybersecurity is quite poor?
I think so, but you can't blame the older generation from that. I mean, if I know from my own experience, my own grandparents or technophobes, they just don't go near computers. But they might have to use it. For example, in this time of coronavirus, I would say there's an awful lot more people who have signed up for online banking, for example. And they may have basic instructions, but the vast majority of people who unfortunately fall for these scams are not very tech literate. And the older generation tend to be less literate that way. So whose job is it to educate them? I think it's everybody's job. It's not just government. I mean, most people on this call are young, probably used to computers. You know, help out your parents or grandparents this way. It's something that you can do, but also look out for those signs of scams as well. If someone has made a cold call, the last thing a bank will do is ask for passwords or ask for remote access to your computer. That's just never done. And if something like that has happened, 100% it's a sure sign of a scam. So education-wise, definitely, I think it's everybody's job. It's our job, being a little bit younger, to look after the older folks who just are not maybe as aware of this stuff. I mean, I've seen scammers deliberately target people who are maybe not fully with it, you know, the people with dementia. That is their ideal target, and they will have no mercy. If you have a look at some of the videos I put onto YouTube, they will literally and have literally scammed people who have got dementia, people who are, there's one woman who was legally blind, she told them, and you know that was not a deterrent. In fact, if anything, this was even more of a target for the people who were running the scams. So yes, if you know someone who might be vulnerable, do keep an eye on them, or tell whoever normally assists them that this can happen. And I think if we all spread the word on these, I think fewer people would get scammed. Was there another question there as well?
Yeah, there are quite a few actually.
Okay.
One of the basically so there are a couple of questions on, do we often get new types of scams, or have they been doing the same thing for a while? And also, with so many of them happening around the world at the same time, do you think sort of a united effort from the governments is required, or do organizations such as Microsoft, should they try to improve the overall virtual ecosystem?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I personally think that there is a way that the cold calls can be stopped. Okay, if you get a phone call, I'm always asked, like, well, why can't phone companies just block these phone calls? And the answer is, it's very hard for them to figure out the difference between a real call and a scam call, particularly because the phone number involved can be spoofed. Okay, so they could even spoof the phone number of a legitimate organization. So you can't tell at all from the phone number. But what you can tell is the patterns that these scammers will make. They will make thousands of these calls. They might be quite short in duration, but the real telltale marker is that they hit phone numbers which are not in service, and lots of them. So it ought to be possible for telephone companies or internet service providers to spot that pattern and stop it. They will literally block the IP address, and there's something called SIP protocol to stop the calls, but that is kind of a technical solution. There has to be a different solution. People can spoof calling numbers, and the only way to stop that is if all of the service providers for phone numbers agree that there is some central registration or some central way that we can actually make sure that those phone numbers are legitimate, like a digital signature for a phone number. And there should be, and I think there are plans to try and do that, but it's a little bit late. Unfortunately, the SIP protocol, the fact that you can spoof a phone number, that's been around for years and it's continually being exploited. But I don't really think the telephone companies have enough of an interest in this to do something about it. They ought to be able to do more.
What about, another question came in, what about the remote access software people? Why don't they do more about it?
Yes, some are trying to do a little bit more. TeamViewer, for example, have finally removed that blacken your screen option from the free version of their software. So I showed you quite an old clip of that. And they have finally removed that because it was just being abused so much. And what I've actually found is that instead of blackening your screen, the scammer will now, because they don't have that option, they'll try and distract people. They'll say, go over to your router and see if the light's on, or take a note of this really long number so you're not looking at your screen while they're editing the total in your bank account. So yes, some are being responsive. And in fact, TeamViewer even tried to block direct connections from India at one point, although I think they've done away with that. Others could be a lot more responsive. They need to take a role in this. Chances are if you report, someone has used this number as a remote access or when they try to scam me, some companies are quite responsive and will block those clients. But of course, there's nothing stopping the scammer just signing up for a new trial or free version and then doing the whole thing over again. So I do think they can do more. I think the right answer is you always have to buy remote access software. And I think those sort of companies ought to be able to fine, if you like, people who are abusing their software via some credit card that was used to purchase it. I think that's maybe one way of tackling or trying to tackle it. Okay.
Right. Thank you. I don't know whether I don't know how much of your presentation is still left.
There's a little bit. I was going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity as well.
Okay. Brilliant. So, because I have a couple of questions asking. So one in particular, which I think would be very interesting, is short version. Do you think there is any sympathy to be had for the scammers? And the more expanded version points out the fact that usually so many of these scamming businesses originate in a very poor country where people could be desperate to earn a living.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I do have a little bit of sympathy for the people who man the phones. Some of them, this may be their only line of work, okay? But having actually observed who they are and what they do and where they work, most of the time these people are not poor. In their spare time, I can actually see what they do. They'll be browsing for the latest cover for their latest iPhone. They'll be shopping for motorcycles and cars online whilst they're not scamming people. So I lose sympathy a little bit whenever somebody says, well, that's maybe they're desperate to feed their family. In my experience, that very rarely happens. And I was speaking to one scammer who had been in the industry for about 4 years. And he had, until he was caught, he had kind of no intention of stopping what he was doing. For him, it was a really good source of money. Although he said that he was, in theory, he was a little bit, he knew what he was doing was wrong, but he was able to kind of park his conscience outside the front door whenever he went into work. And I don't sympathize at all with somebody like that. You don't feed your family by doing something that you know is wrong for 4 years. Okay, you might have to if you're in dire straits, but you don't stick at it that long. But yeah, I have a little bit more sympathy for the people who man the phones. The people I do not have sympathy for are the people at the very top. And as I say, there are multi-millionaires in India because of this as an industry. And there's one of my videos where I managed to identify who one or two of those individuals were, and actually the police did finally arrest them in their luxurious houses overlooking golf courses and literally Olympic-sized swimming pools outside their front door, and they'll drive to work in their Porsche and all the rest of it. And those people have absolutely zero conscience, and they will literally make their fortune by scamming old people. And I have zero sympathy for that group.
Okay, thank you. Another question, which I think is quite a useful one. There is difficulty in recognizing legitimate call centers with the scammers. How do you tell a BT call center who asks you to provide specific information a specific way, and how do you do that?
Yeah, well, I'm always skeptical about any cold call, and I always assume that whoever's calling is a scammer until they can prove otherwise. And if someone is calling you, they should have a way of identifying that they are legitimate. And if it's somebody like BT or your, gas company, they should be able to quote to you what your customer reference number is, or at least part of your postcode, or something that you can at least get a little bit more confidence that they have real data about you. Now, it's not always the case. I mean, for example, the TalkTalk company had a data breach, and a lot of their customer information was leaked in India, and people in scam call centers were actually able to quote customer numbers from TalkTalk people a while ago, and were pretending to be TalkTalk. So I would still always treat it with a degree of skepticism, but as I say, the key thing is any of those people should be able to at least give you part of your customer reference numbers is usually the right way of doing it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I received a number of questions with regards to the process of how you obtain this information, whether it is legal or not, and what you do with it afterwards.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, what I do is I invite the scammers onto my computer. So I'm just going to jump to another slide here. I think it's the next one, is it? Yeah, okay. So it's just going to come on to that. I turn the tables on these scammers. So I invite them into my virtual machine. So I deliberately set up my computer so that it looks like a real PC, but in fact it's something called a VM, a virtual machine. And it looks like a real PC. I have files on there which will convince the scammer that it's real, but I have it set up in a way that I can trace the connection that comes in. So my real host PC will be on the left. It will run a little software version here on the right. And then I stick on something called Wireshark, and Wireshark looks at this traffic coming in and out of the virtual computer. And that way I can see what happens. And here's an example of some of that output. I will be able to see if I have a little filter at the top called ip.geoip.country equals India. And usually that's the filter I have on, and that sorts out some of the noise. And I can see usually where the geography is of the, so I will know typically that whoever's just connected to my PC is coming from Delhi. And that's a fairly straightforward thing to do. But what I also do is use their connection. So they have set up remote access to my computer. There is a way, if you know what you're doing, to make use of that connection that the scammer has set up to reverse it. So if you look in TeamViewer, for example, there's a way to swap connections with the other side. If you know what you're doing, you can do that without them knowing. So is that legal? I'm not entirely clear, but I mean, it's certainly accessing somebody's computer without their permission. And in theory, that wouldn't be legal. But then again, the scammer has set up that connection, not me. So I don't honestly know where that puts me and what I do, but it's incredibly useful because if you can get that reverse connection, you can see what they see. You can pick up their files if necessary. You can even switch on their webcam. And that's what makes... But I go no further than that. I try to identify who it is that's doing the scamming, and then I typically let the police know. So yes, strictly from, if you read the letter of the law, I'm getting access to their computers without their permission. And in theory, that's illegal. However, I wait until they try to steal money from me, and only then do I even attempt to go anywhere near their side of that connection. Now, I don't think it's ever been tested before, but it's a legitimate question to ask. I don't go any further than identifying who they are. I don't put viruses on their network or something which is clearly illegal. But what I do try and do is find out at least who's trying to make that scam call. So honestly, I wouldn't still advise anyone to do exactly what I do. By all means, waste their time. By all means, invite them onto the computer and, act dumb and, type stuff wrongly and waste their time, definitely. But making the connection the other way, you might end up in trouble. So I wouldn't encourage anyone to do that. However, if you're competent and confident and go no further than that, and you're prepared to go to the police, then I think it's actually quite a worthwhile thing to do, because the police will not be able to tell who it is running these scams without information of the sort that I would give them. So hopefully that answers it. But say I wouldn't encourage anyone to do exactly what I do.
Thank you. And a question that's been hanging for a while. Similarly, so you say you passed the data on to police, but in one particular case, you also passed it on to BBC.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the one, I showed a little clip a little while ago. So this one here, where I managed to see the CCTV that was in the scam call centre. At that stage, I fairly quickly figured out that this was a fairly big operation. There's 28 seats in this call centre. They would run pretty much 24/7, as I say, Australia, UK, US. They ran this round the clock, and I could see that they're making huge amounts of money on it. And I have reported quite a lot of these scam call centres before, and usually the Indian police do almost nothing with it, or at least if they do something, they certainly don't tell me that they've done anything. Basically, very little happens. It's maybe not a priority. It's maybe that there's corruption in the police. I don't know. So I decided for this one, because there was that much extra footage, and it was literally, I was able to get both their audio and this video, so I could hear their scam calls. And it was absolutely watertight that I knew exactly what they were doing and just how much money they were making. So only at that point did I involve the media, the BBC, because I thought if they really are making the millions that I could see they were making, then this sort of footage would be of a lot of interest to media in general. So I really wanted somebody who was in mainstream media to take hold of this. And what the BBC did was actually distribute a lot of this throughout news channels all over the world. And the end result of that is the Indian police were absolutely compelled to do something. They couldn't be seen to be sitting and doing nothing as they had done before. This was pretty much so compelling that what actually happened was within 12 hours of the original broadcast of that Panorama programme, they actually raided this call centre, went into the right place, the secret bit out the back, and they arrested the call centre owner. And I think without that, though, if I had just reported it as I had done all the other previous call centres, I'm not sure whether anyone would have been arrested. So that was the goal there. I handed over all of the information to Panorama, worked with them to kind of produce that TV programme. And I think it has paid dividends because, say, I've finally seen action. I have not seen anyone else arrested as a result of anything I passed on. But this one did lead to an arrest. I think they had no choice.
Okay, thank you. And do you think the awareness, well, it sounds like you do, the awareness around the world has improved as a result of the Panorama collaboration?
I'd like to hope so. What it did was the Panorama people got a few of the victims to talk about their experience, to talk, we had literally 72,000 phone calls as well from this call centre. And we listened to some of them, and some of them are just heartbreaking. As I say, one of the people was legally blind and they still continued to scam. One person suffered from depression and was actually crying on the phone as they were trying to charge him £1,200. And, you know, for normal people, that you couldn't see yourself do that. These guys were so accustomed to scamming that they had no qualms, they had no second thoughts about that. Is it going to make a difference? Anecdotally, I've heard that after this was broadcast, a number of call centres closed down, if not temporarily, because they thought that, I mean, a lot of the call centres are clustered together, you saw on those maps. They thought that the police were now going to start to up their game a bit and start regularly raiding these places, and some of them shut down directly as a result. I can show you a few emails on that. And whether they've started up again, I don't know. I mean, I'm getting fewer phone calls than I used to, but that may well be because of the COVID problem and the fact that these people are sitting next to each other in a call centre and there's restrictions on movement in India. So I can't pretend that I had anything to do with that, but I would like to think it's at least having a small impact. And maybe if these scammers are thinking twice about scamming people in other countries, that at least might be a small victory, but I really don't think the problem will go away quickly.
And on a more sort of personal level, I've got a couple of repeating questions again.
Mm-hmm.
If you're getting millionaires out of business by doing what you do you get threats from them or anything like that?
Not so far. I have had the odd email where you can clearly see that someone's not very happy. It's never direct. I obviously have a YouTube channel, and I will see almost on every other week someone trying to reset my password for my YouTube channel, and my email address is on that YouTube channel. I see these all the time. There's people who definitely are not happy with me. I regularly get a number of immediate thumbs down every time I release a video. But, that might be people as well who just don't like my videos either. But no, I suspect that is someone or some groups who have been affected by this. I've put everybody in this call centre out of a job, but that's no bad thing because they are scamming your parents, your grandparents, people in all sorts of countries. So it is not a bad thing.
Okay, thank you. I think we're good to move on to your next section.
Yeah, there's just a little bit. Let me just. Okay, I'm getting the next little bit. Sorry, it's back to my avatar here again. Let me just race through these again here. Yeah, I'll not be more than about 5 or 10 minutes now. This is okay. I showed this bit before. Who typically works in a scam call center? This particular guy sent me his passport, which was slightly unusual. He was an ex-scammer, and what he was asking for was a job. Could I give him a job? But it tends to be that the people who operate the phones are younger people, as I say. Maybe they are people who can't get jobs. Maybe they are people who, if they were working in even a legitimate job, just wouldn't be well paid. Whereas if you're in a scam call center, the incentives, in other words, just how much you scam from people, give you a bonus. So if you can park your conscience, then that's exactly what they'll do. I did want to talk a little bit about, and maybe some of the audience here will be interested in this. My background is I did computers at school. I went to university, I did engineering, in fact, microelectronics. So I'm more of a physicist than even an engineer. But it might surprise you to know that my own background is not really IT, but IT was more or less a subset of what I was doing in engineering and physics. But what I did want to point out was, if you're interested in this sort of area, people who get into cybersecurity tend to be quite well paid. So I did this little bit of research before presenting these slides, but if you have if you're either a penetration tester or in the cybersecurity area, the average salary is well in excess of 55,000 a year. It's quite well paid, and say that's the average salary. And not only that, if you have an interest in this sort of area, it can be quite fun. As I say, I don't really have a formal qualification in cybersecurity, but I've been working in the area so long now that I could probably teach some of it myself. But it can be quite a fun, if you're into that sort of area about computer security, it can be quite fun. So pen testers, penetration testers are people who go in and check the security of both IT and even physical infrastructure. And what they tend to do is divide themselves into two teams, a red team and a blue team. And the red team will typically try to see if there's any vulnerabilities. So they will try to literally hack software to see if there's any vulnerabilities in there that they can exploit. Can they break the system? Can they break into it? Can they fetch some of the types of documents that I've been able to fetch, but in a kind of a formalized way? And the blue team will try and defend against that. Can they see and defend against those sort of attacks? Can they set up little honeypot machines where they will deliberately attract people to what looks like a vulnerable computer, but in fact it's set up in a way similar to I do, so that I have mine set up that I can see what comes in and out. If anybody does connect to it, I can see where that connection's coming from. I will be able to look and see what sort of files they're using, so I can build up a picture of who it is trying to attack me. And if you have those teams working together, a blue team and a red team, they can be really effective at both trying to see where you are vulnerable and defending against that. And it gives you a really, if you're into that sort of thing, a fun way of trying to make your security as good as it can possibly be. And if you're going to take anything from this, is maybe consider this as a future career, because cybersecurity people are in huge demand. And as I say, that salary is probably going to go up and up in the coming years. So if you're thinking about getting into this area and you're thinking maybe about, ASA2 levels and even university, something in this sort of area is definitely a skill set that will be in huge demand. So it's definitely worth thinking about. And yeah, so just the last bit is really, if you're going to take anything from this, it's if you look at something on the internet or you get a phone call or a letter or anything, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And just be aware of that. Everybody says this, if it seems too good to be true, then it probably is. That is the best way that you can defend yourself against these things. Use your common sense, okay, but always be a skeptic. I think you are far less likely to be scammed if you treat everything as if someone's trying to scam you. If you're a skeptic about anything you hear at all, and you question it, and you ask basic questions, you are far less likely to be a victim of a scam. And if anything, it's probably that middle point, be skeptical, which is probably the thing to take away from this. You've seen how those scams work. If you can identify and spot that this looks like a scam I've heard of before, you are far less likely to be a victim of a scam. And just educating yourself, maybe look at some of those YouTube videos. There's not just my channel, there's other ones as well. See how they work and understand them. If you can understand that, you're far less likely to be a victim. And again, finally, just if you're confident with it, why not try a bit of scam baiting? Maybe don't go quite as far as I do, but if you get the phone calls instead of the normal advice to hang up, keep them on the call for a while, because when they're doing that, say they're not scamming your parents or grandparents. So really, that's all I have. I was kind of waiting for some Q&As. I think I had some of them as we went along. I don't want to keep everybody more than an hour, but I'm quite happy to answer more questions if they're there.
Yes, there are. Thank you so much, Jim.
That's okay.
Awesome. I've got a few sort of desperate questions here.
Sure.
One of them on a techie side, when you talk about vulnerabilities in servers and computers, what does that mean in real terms? Does that mean poorly written software or?
It can be. It can be. It usually is. When we talk about vulnerabilities, it's usually you can, if you run. This is kind of more technical bit, but if you can manage to crash a computer program in a way that you can put little bits of code into it, and that's quite possible, then you've got a vulnerability there. So a lot of what the penetration testers do is to actually exercise software in a way that maybe it wasn't designed. So they'll, if it's looking for inputs from something, they'll put huge amounts of data in there to see if they can make it crash. And if they can make it crash, then in theory they can insert their own code in there and effectively gain access to the running computer. So that tends to be most of what a software penetration tester does. But there's people who actually do physical pen testing, and literally their job is, can they get into your building, whether it's an office building or some sort of computer infrastructure. If you have a look on YouTube, there's something called DEF CON and the Confessions of a Pen Tester, or if you look even for the phrase pen tester, I let myself in, there's some very interesting videos on people who can just either pick locks or socially engineer people to open doors for them, or if they find out ways of getting into buildings and actual physical access to computers. So say it's not just about the software element, it's about protecting your buildings and infrastructure as well. And there's some very interesting videos to say on YouTube on that subject.
Thank you very much. Questions that can probably go together. What made you start recording what you do on YouTube and obviously publishing it?
Yeah, I've kind of been asked that a fair bit. Initially, whenever I put a YouTube video up, it was only to record what a scammer did because I thought people might be interested in it. And I naively thought that if I report this to an internet service provider, that they might stop this person, they might take them off the air. And I couldn't email a very big video file, so I actually initially put this on just with the view that this is one way of getting a video file onto the internet. So it wasn't really any more than that. I never really intended to have a YouTube channel. I hate the term YouTuber because that's not really my day job anyway, but that's what I am now. With 1 million people, I can't call myself not a YouTuber. But no, I never intended really to do anything other than report people to their internet service providers and hopefully get some of the scammers stopped. But as I say, a lot of people have become interested in some of these scams and the fact that I delve a little bit deeper into them. So I've kept the YouTube channel going, and I'd say, yeah, I'll keep it going because I think it is of interest to a lot of people.
And have you been approached by any big businesses to test their security?
No. I don't know whether they're afraid of me or not because, as I say, a lot of the comments are, I would hate to get on Jim's bad side, but have they approached me? 1 or 2 people have approached me to say, would you mind doing this? But honestly, I haven't got the proper formal qualifications for doing it. And although I probably could, I've always refused that. So no, no is the short answer.
Well, thank you very much. There's a comment as well from a while ago when we were discussing companies. And I think it's a fair comment. If a lot of scamming results from them misrepresenting companies such as Microsoft and so on, shouldn't it be that the industry takes initiative and try to get their name into a better state by subsidizing it or trying to pursue it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the biggest name that scammers will use is Microsoft, and Microsoft have their own digital crimes unit, and they are trying desperately to do something about it, but they're actually not that effective. They have organized raids on these call centers from time to time, but it's incredibly difficult to actually pin it down to individual ones. There probably are big companies who should be doing more. I mean, I've heard scammers using internet service providers. So there's one big one called Telstra in Australia, And if you've ever heard any phone calls in the UK, it's usually we are BT or we are your internet service provider. And, if it's BT, for example, maybe they could do something about the fact that someone's abusing their name. But I haven't actually seen any evidence of that. Telstra, BT, there's Verizon and Comcast and all in the USA. I haven't seen any huge impact from those companies. It's really Microsoft who's the big player there, but they aren't really that effective.
I have a question here in case you had any specific advice on where to study up on these things, essentially on cybersecurity or something of the like, or do you just find something you enjoy and learn that?
Well, for me, being hands-on is the best learning you can have. So to my mind, you don't necessarily need the formal qualifications to be effective. Okay, I'm probably a good case in point. However, if you did want to be a formal pen tester, a formal security engineer, someone who's involved in cybersecurity, there are proper courses and proper qualifications you can get to go into that area. And I guess if it interests you, that's the formal way into it. But there's nothing quite like being hands-on. And if you're prepared to go in and you can read up about it, you can look at videos on the subject, you can just search the internet for it. But there's ways that you can learn to become a very effective cybersecurity specialist, even without those qualifications. And, it depends very much on the type of job that you want. If you can put on your CV that you have experience in the area, sometimes that's as good as having the formal qualifications if you can demonstrate it. And it depends very much on the company. But as I say, Google search for things like pen tester or security analyst or cybersecurity specialist, and you'll see what you need to get into those sort of companies. So yes, it depends very much on the area you want to go into.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we can probably stop there. The questions have definitely slowed down. So thank you so much, Jim, for answering our questions. And
you're welcome.
Thank you very much to the audience for sticking through. It has been a bit longer than we expected.
That's okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully not too boring, and good luck with the kind of the COVID things, and hopefully we'll all come out of this before too long. And I would love to turn on my webcam at some point, but you never know. Maybe look out in the YouTube channel. Maybe someday I'll do that.
Well, we have to do one more question relevant to that. When are we expecting your next video? Big fan.
So I think at the end of next week, I'm looking at one or two scammers at the moment, and I was half expecting a phone call in the middle of this presentation from that guy. My next one might be that the guy who's about to phone me, I've got his passport as my desktop background, and I just want to see how he reacts to that. So that might be the next one, but he's got to phone me back first.
Maybe he's in this presentation right now. So
it could be. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Jim.
You're welcome.
We can leave it there. Thank you so much. I will end the presentation now.
Thank you.